long arm cast and just removed. We're going to assess his limitations and do some mobilizations. First of all, Bryce, are you comfortable on the table? Okay. I want you to tell me if, when I'm doing any of these mobilizations, if I'm causing you any pain or discomfort, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is work on shoulder mobilizations to increase flexion. So we're going to come through and we're going to assess his range of motion, take him through his range, find out where his limitations are. Here is where he starts to be limited. So we're going to start, because he doesn't have a whole lot of pain, we're going to just go right to grade 3 mobilizations, which are large amplitude at the beginning of range. Do some mobilizations there. And then, later in treatment, we can move through the resistance with some small amplitude grade 4s, all working to improve and increase his range of motion. So we would start out at the beginning of his range with large amplitude grade 3s into flexion of the shoulder, and then we would move through his resistance and do some small amplitude grade 4s. And if at any point it became painful, we could take him back to the beginning range and just do some 1s or 2s for pain relief. He also has some limitations in abduction. So we would first assess his range, see where his range of motion went. He's limited at about 90. So we're going to support up at his shoulder. We're going to take him just to the beginning, his range of motion, do some large amplitude grade 3 mobilizations into abduction. And then we can do grade 4, small amplitude through the resistance to improve range of motion. So we would begin here at the beginning of his range with large amplitude grade 3. And we can follow up with through the resistance, small amplitude grade 4s. We also have to check his range of motion in internal and external rotation. So we're going to start at internal rotation. Find his limitation. Support at the elbow and the forearm. And again, start with grade 3 large amplitude at the beginning of his range. And then we can move through his resistance and do some nice small amplitude grade 4s to increase the range of motion. You okay?
Mm-hmm.
We do the same for medial rotation, or for lateral rotation. I just did medial rotation, we're going to move to lateral rotation now. So again, assess his range of motion, find his resistance. Here we go. We're going to start with, again, grade 3, large amplitude at the beginning of his range. And then move through the resistance and get some nice small amplitude grade 4s to increase his range of motion. Now that we've addressed shoulder flexion, shoulder abduction, internal and external rotation, how you doing? Okay?
Good.
Okay. So we're going to move down to his elbow. We're going to assess his range of motion at his elbow. First thing we'll look at is flexion. And the paper said that at 90 degrees, he had just about 15 degrees of motion. The first thing we're going to work on is his flexion. Come in with this forearm, let it support on my shoulder. Do a mild distraction, maybe a grade 2 distraction, and then grade 3 mobilization into flexion to gain more motion. A large amplitude motion into flexion, and then you can move through the resistance and do some small amplitude grade 4s into the flexion. So again, gentle distraction, beginning of his range, some large amplitude grade 3s, through the resistance, and small amplitude grade 4s. He was also limited in extension. So we would support his forearm a bit, or his upper arm a little bit, and support at the elbow. Hold down here in his hand. Assess his range of motion into extension. He only had a little bit. So again, we're going to find the beginning range. Grade 3 large amplitude at the beginning of his range. Move through the resistance with grade 4 small amplitude into extension. Again, we'll start with the large amplitude grade 3s. Move through the resistance and do small amplitude grade 4s. Okay. And then I'm sure he would be limited in pronation as well. So again, we'll assess pronation, supination. He's limited into pronation. So we're going to support at the wrist. Come here. Just move his hand into pronation. And start with, again, the grade 3, so large amplitude at the beginning of range. Take him through his resistance and do just some gentle grade 4s, small amplitude. Okay, we'll move down to his wrist and assess his wrist range of motion. Limited to about 15 degrees of wrist range. So we're just going to put his hand up. Going to assess where the resistance is. We're going to give him some large amplitude at the beginning of his range. Grade 3. Get some more wrist extension. And then we're going to go through the resistance and just give some grade 4s, small amplitude through the resistance to increase his flexion or extension. Okay. To work on flexion, assess his range of motion. Limited at about 15 degrees. Going to feel where the resistance is. And then just give some large amplitude mobilizations at the beginning of his range, which would be grade 3s. And then we'll move through the resistance and give some small amplitude, grade 4s. You doing okay, Bryce?
Yes.
Okay. And then we'll check for some ulnar deviation. I'm going to support at his wrist. Hold at his forearm and assess the motion. Find out where he's limited. Take him to the beginning range and do some large amplitude grade 3s. And the motion's going to be up on his forearm into ulnar deviation. Grade 3, large amplitude at the beginning of range. Take him through resistance. Grade 4, small amplitude. So again, we'll start out with large amplitude at the beginning range, and then move through the resistance, small amplitude at the end range. You okay?
Yes.
You all right? Okay.
Yes.